Well, hello, everybody. My name is Maggie Bumbury, and I am a Clean Energy Research Coordinator with the Sierra Club Canada Foundation's Atlantic chapter. So I work with the Beyond Coal campaign, which I'll talk about in the next slide here. But we're based in the Atlantic provinces, so we serve the people of Newfoundland, Labrador, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. And this presentation is going to be on the electricity landscape of Newfoundland and Labrador and moving into an absolute zero grid in 2035. So the Beyond Coal campaign was launched in January 2021 with the goal of getting Atlantic Canada off coal and transitioning to clean renewable energy as quickly as possible. As we began the work on the campaign, we quickly realized that coal, though it is one of the major contributors to our dirty grid here in Atlantic Canada, there are a variety of other fossil fuel or non-renewable sources of energy that are also clogging up our grid, such as biomass, non-renewable biomass, fossil gas, nuclear, and mega hydro. So although we started off as a Beyond Coal campaign, we've certainly broadened our horizons to include other areas of energy as well as we look towards moving towards a renewable grid in our future. And you can check out our website. The link is embedded here. I won't click on it, but you can check it out. It's Beyond Climate Promises. And we have lots of resources and news articles and other fact pages that you guys can check out on there as well. So this presentation is going to refer a lot to the term absolute zero. So this is a term that we've developed here at the Sierra Club, and we expect more than the status quo. So today, the status quo is for most government, businesses, and organizations to reach net zero. The problem with net zero is the way that it's structured currently, which allows large emitters to keep polluting the environment while offsetting those emissions with carbon credits, tree planting, and carbon capture and storage technologies. And this is if we even trust these emitters to self-regulate their own offsetting activities. So we here at the Sierra Club think we can do better, and we are picturing an electricity grid that is absolute zero. So absolute zero means that the energy we are adding to the grid is 100% non-emitting and will not require the use of carbon capture storage technologies or the planting of trees to offset our emissions. So basically a grid that is 100% reliable and 100% powered by clean renewable sources of energy, such as solar, wind, and battery storage. So this will not include forms of energy that have only include energy that has the lowest impact on the environment. So this will not include large-scale hydro or nuclear, which have been shown to have detrimental impacts on the surrounding environment where they operate. And a recent report was released by the David Suzuki Foundation this year, and it's called the Shifting Pathways Report. And you can find it online if you just Google it, as well as it'll be linked later in the presentation. But this report talks about how Canada is positioned, not currently positioned, but can be positioned to reach 100% zero emissions in our electricity sector by 2035. So this presentation will kind of use that report as its backbone, and we're going to break down how well positioned Newfoundland and Labrador is to meet this target and what the province can do to reach it. So we're first going to get into a little brief overview and background of Newfoundland and Labrador's electricity history and landscape. So this is a really blurry picture of oh, sorry, there's something in the waiting room here. I'm just going to let them in. So this here is a really blurry photo of a Petty Harbor hydro plant. But in 1885 is where it all started, with the backing of some local businessmen. The St. John's Electric Company was convinced by the government as well as private businesses to use electricity instead of gas for their lighting needs. And so this led to the development of Newfoundland and Labrador's hydro resources. So in 1900 was the first hydroelectric plant at Petty Harbor, which and it was completed that year, and it made the first electric power plant in the province. Quickly following the year of 1900, electricity began to spread outside the capital of St. John's and across the island Newfoundland, and subsequent hydroelectric operations were established along the Avalon and Bonavista regions by two utilities, the United Towns Electrical Company Limited and the Union Light and Power Company, respectively. So in 1924, the St. John's Light and Power Company was sold to Montreal Engineering. And the Montreal Engineering had a vision of amalgamating all the power resources across Newfoundland. And subsequently, Montreal Engineering was renamed the Newfoundland Light and Power Company. Stocks were first issued to the public in 1949. And into the 1950s, the Newfoundland Light and Power Company purchased the distribution systems in Corner Brook and Deer Lake, and also expanded their generating capacity with the addition of new hydroelectric plants along the Avalon region, and eventually moving their operations into central Newfoundland. Again, the quality of some of these photos are not the best due to their age. But in 1966, multiple utilities were amalgamated by the Newfoundland Light and Power Company. These utilities included the Union Light and Power Company and the United Towns Electric Company. So those were the first two initial utilities that were operating in the province at the time. And in 1987, the shareholders voted to create a holding company for Newfoundland Light and Power, and the holding company is known as Fortis Inc. And in 1998, Newfoundland Light and Power Company was renamed Newfoundland Power, which is now a subsidiary owned by Fortis Company, and is the main supplier of electricity throughout the island of Newfoundland. And so this map just shows the current operations of Newfoundland Power. As you can see, it's kind of divided up currently on the island. So electric distribution is kind of split throughout the island between Newfoundland Power and Newfoundland Hydro. So the areas marked in yellow here are where Newfoundland and Power operate. And they currently have a fleet of 23 hydro plants, as well as backup generators as well. So the other utility that provides electricity to the province of Newfoundland and Labrador is Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro. And so this map depicts how the distribution is split up. So like in the previous map, yellow is Newfoundland Power, and in this map, the light blue is Hydro. Click the next slide. So this slide depicts the Manyhek Lake Hydro Dam, which was developed in 1954. So this dam was the first electric plant developed in Labrador. And this plant was developed to meet the needs of an iron and ore mine in the region. And all hydro plants in the Labrador region through the 50s and 60s were developed by private companies to meet the requirements of these large resource projects in the Labrador region. This hydro dam is now owned by Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro. So this was the first electric plant in Labrador region and the first of the acquisitions from Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro. And then moving into the 1960s, the government enters the picture and decides to form a Crown Corporation. And this Crown Corporation is now known as Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro. At the time, it was known as the Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro Commission. So this commission purchased a number of other hydro groups in the province, such as the Churchill Falls Labrador Corporation, which was responsible for overseeing the development of the largest hydroelectric dam in the province, which is Churchill Falls. In 1969, an ill-fated deal was signed between Hydro-Quebec and the Churchill Falls Labrador Corporation, which agreed to the sale of almost all of the electricity produced at Churchill Falls to Hydro-Quebec at a very low price that is still that price is still set today and does not incorporate inflation over the past number of decades or other maintenance or investments into infrastructure that may have had to be made by the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And this deal is set to expire in 2041. So there are talks currently going on between how to restructure this deal and to make sure that the proper pricing is put in place for the electricity being sold out of province. And this photo here just shows some suits sitting around a table drafting up this deal that was signed in 1969 between Hydro-Quebec and Churchill Falls Group. So today we have Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro. So in 1975, the company was renamed and it is commonly referred to as Hydro, and that's what I'll be referring to it as throughout the remainder of the presentation. And since 2007, Hydro has been a subsidiary of the provincial Crown-owned holding company Nalcor. So the two main big holding companies for electric utility in the province are Fortis, who own Newfoundland Power, and Nalcor, who own Hydro. And they both Hydro and Newfoundland Power are the main utilities of the province. So moving into present day activities, Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro, or Hydro, they have a spotty history with the Innu Nation. So Churchill Falls was developed on the traditional lands of the Innu Nation without proper consent or consultation. And the construction of the dam led to the flooding of ancestral lands, traditional burial grounds, and hunting grounds of the Innu Nation. Following the development of Churchill Falls, Nalcor, their parent company, wanted to continue to develop along the Churchill River. And Muskrat Falls was the next megadam project undertaken by the utility, and has since been characterized as a misguided project by an independent inquiry into the development. So this inquiry revealed that the government of Newfoundland failed to safeguard the best interests of the province's population. And up until today, full power is still not flowing from Muskrat Falls. And this is due to software issues with the technology of the Labrador Island Link, which is a subsea cable that connects Labrador to the island of Newfoundland, where power flows from Muskrat Falls. And these software issues have been the main contributor to an increase in price of the project. And this price tag has increased by the number of $256 million. And the project's current cost is standing around $13 billion. And right now, there is no estimated timeline of when the software issues with the Labrador Island Link will be resolved. So we are still not sure whether or not when we will see full power flowing from Muskrat Falls. And this has certainly impacted other provinces who were relying on this power to meet their own renewable energy targets and needs. So basically, it's just a big boondoggle, or as the inquiry calls it, a misguided project. So now we're going to just talk briefly about Newfoundland's and Labrador's climate landscape. As we know, Hurricane Fiona just went through the Atlantic provinces and left extensive damage throughout Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, New Brunswick, and PEI. And my heart goes out to everybody who is impacted by the devastation that was left in Fiona's wake. But it's important to acknowledge that these natural events, such as hurricanes, are a result of climate change and changing sea temperatures and changing wind patterns and a plethora of other impacts that are associated with our changing climate. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as I move into talking about Newfoundland and Labrador's emissions and its climate policy landscape. So currently, Newfoundland and Labrador emits around 9.5 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. This number is from 2020, and this is equals about 2 million cars per year. It's just to give you a visualization. And the main sectors that contribute to the province's emissions are transportation, oil and gas, and electricity generation. This pie graph here depicts the current emissions electricity mix breakdown of Newfoundland and Labrador from 2021. So the majority of electricity in the province is provided by hydro from small dams that are run throughout the island of Newfoundland, as well as large mega dam projects in Labrador, such as Churchill Falls and Muskrat Falls, as I mentioned previously. There's a very small, minute portion of electricity generated in the province by wind. There are currently 3 wind developments in the province, and the other slice of the pie that incorporates electricity is combustion. So this includes oil and gas combustion. So the Holyrood thermal generating station would be included in this light blue slice of the pie here. And this generating station currently generates between 15 and 25% of just the island's electricity alone. So that's not including Labrador, where this pie graph depicts both the island and Labrador. And this plant, Holyrood, was actually scheduled to be shut down last year in 2021, but due to the delays that I talked about previously from Muskrat Falls, this has resulted in prolonging the life of this oil fire generating station. And during its peak production, Holyrood can burn approximately 18,000 barrels of oil a day. So the province's current strategies, we're going to get into both the province's renewable energy strategies as well as the strategies or targets put in place by the utilities. So the province of Newfoundland and Labrador does not currently have a specific renewable energy target in place. So that means they don't have a set goal of how much they want to reduce their emissions by 2030 or 2050. They did release a renewable energy plan in 2021 that outlines the province's strategy to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. So they don't have any kind of midterm or intermediate goals, but they do have the goal of being net zero by 2050. So the actions laid out in this plan are categorized on a short-term, medium-term, and long-term basis. And in the subsequent slides, I'm going to kind of break down the pros and cons of this plan. Shifting the focus to the utilities. So Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro in 2018 released a reliability and resource adequacy study. And this kind of addresses the utilities' long-term approach to providing, as they characterize it, continued least cost, reliable service for their customers. And this plan covers a 10-year period between 2019 and 2028. So it is a bit outdated as it's already 2022 and 2028 is not that far away. What we really look for when we're looking at provincial and utility strategies and plans is for continued updates to these plans, which is something that we haven't been seeing a lot across the Atlantic region that we would like to see more of. And Newfoundland Power and Hydro, so both utilities in the province, have co-developed an electrification, conservation, and demand management plan, which I will also talk about in the next slides. So this is the cover photo of the province's renewable energy plan. So this plan it doesn't really break down any specific goals of the province. Right now, the province is in a difficult position as it is invested heavily in mega dam infrastructure that they classify as renewable energy. So throughout the plan, hydro is talked about extensively as their renewable, the backbone of their renewable energy infrastructure. So while the premise behind hydroelectricity may seem renewable, it's in fact, if it's done at a small scale. In Labrador, especially these mega dam developments that they're referring to in the report are far from green. So expansive areas of land are needed to be flooded when creating a large reservoir for dams such as Churchill and Muskrat Falls. And these flooding practices can increase methyl mercury levels in drinking and freshwater supplies. They can have negative impacts on local fish stocks. And they can also create more emissions instead of actually reducing an area's emissions. So the report does heavily focus on, they're already positioned as a renewable energy economy. And if you consider mega hydro as renewable, that may be true, but we certainly do not consider mega hydro to be a renewable source of energy, and don't believe that all the province's problems are solved by having these two large infrastructures developed in Labrador. So while this plan it highlights export opportunities for the grid to be considered renewable. And for their province's grid to be considered absolute zero, it would mean scrapping these mega hydro developments and moving towards wind generation for in-province use and not for export. But unfortunately, due to the vast amount of money that has already been invested into Muskrat and Churchill Falls, I can't foresee the province taking either of those facilities offline and bringing more wind online. So this is the short pros and cons of the current renewable energy plan by the province. So a pro of this plan is that it talks about enhancing the inventory of wind and solar. So they talk about using small scale wind and solar for residential use, especially in Labrador, where a lot of communities, isolated communities, are currently running diesel generation. Yeah, so I just said that, yeah, looking at new ways to generate electricity for isolated diesel powered communities. It talks about a review of the provisions of the Electrical Power Control Act of 1994. So this act kind of governs the rights to who can generate and distribute electricity. So by reviewing this act, they're going to look at who has the rights to supply, transmit, distribute, and sell power, and to get a better look at opportunities for customer-owned generation. So small-scale utilities, small-scale municipal owned and operated utilities, which is a pro for us. And they also they have a whole section in this report highlighting training and jobs that will be available as they bring more renewable sources such as wind and solar online, which will have a huge, they talk about the economic benefit that'll have to the province. The cons of this report are they talk about enhancing the inventory of biomass and hydro in the province, which we don't, here at the Sierra Club, we don't consider either of those renewable unless you're talking about very small scale hydro. So we don't want to see any provinces bringing on more biomass or large scale hydro in their renewable energy or net zero plans. This report focuses heavily on export, especially of green hydrogen, ammonia, and biogas. So they talk about using, new renewables such as wind to power this kind of exporting economy, where we think that the focus should be on keeping the wind generation in province and not kind of trying to get rid of it. They also talk about new offshore oil and gas platforms. So in the report, they talk about electrifying opportunities such as new offshore oil and gas. It seems pretty counterintuitive to have a renewable energy plan where you're talking about making new offshore oil and gas activities green. They just shouldn't be happening at all, full stop. And they don't set any targets in this report either. They just have these arbitrary timelines where they have a short, medium, and long-term goals with no actual years set. And then moving into the utilities plans. So as I mentioned, Newfoundland Hydro has their own plan they developed in 2018, looking at their operations moving in the 2028. And then there's also a report that was co-developed by both Hydro and Newfoundland Power, looking at the electrification of the province and demand management issues. Sorry, my mouse is a bit tricky here. So first I'm going to talk about Newfoundland Hydro study, looking at their plans for today, tomorrow, and the future. So this little pie graph here depicts what they're predicting their generation mix will look like into 2027. So a large portion of the pie obviously is hydro. This will be coming from Churchill and Muskrat Falls. Purchases another 13%. They didn't specify where these purchases would be coming from, assuming they'd be from Hydro-Quebec. And Labrador Island Link deliveries. So this would be hydro deliveries across the Labrador Island Link, which connects Labrador to Newfoundland. And then they don't have any thermal. So the good news is they are anticipating taking thermal offline. Bad news is it's going to be heavily subsidized by large scale hydro. And they are predicting having Holyrood offline by 2027, which is good, although it's fairly delayed from the original retirement date of 2021. And this co-developed report by Hydro and Newfoundland Power, the two main takeaways from this study are they have two scenarios as well as a baseline scenario. So they talk about these different targets they could achieve based on the scenario. So the baseline scenario, which you see here in green, that incorporates the utilities 2019 provincial energy usage forecast. So basically business as usual based on a 2019 report on what they would be using. The lower scenario, both the lower and upper scenario focus on varying levels of utility intervention. So this would include different incentives to customers as well as education around efficiency measures. So the lower scenario would be not as much utility intervention, the upper scenario involving more heavily in utility intervention. So upper scenario would basically be like the ideal scenario. So this graph here shows a forecasted electricity consumption under these three scenarios going into 2034. So using the upper scenario, we can have energy savings around 764 gigawatts an hour, and with the lower scenario around 340 gigawatts an hour. So that's just kind of showing that they are incorporating these kind of areas of study into their future plans. The next kind of key takeaway from this report is demand side initiatives. So this pie graph on the left shows the lower scenario. Pie graph on the right shows the upper scenario. Again, upper being kind of the idyllic scenario. So this shows that you can have peak demand reduction, which would be how much energy you're able to save drawing from the grid during peak demand hours, which would be in the evenings when everybody's home or in the morning when everybody's getting ready for work. So in the lower scenario, they're predicting a reduction of 270 megawatts, and in the upper scenario, a reduction of 402 megawatts. The upper scenario involving more conservation, so using less electricity at home than the upper scenario, which is kind of 25% conservation, 75% demand management. So demand management would include intervention areas where they're just making people use less electricity, less demand on the grid, whereas conservation is, giving out your energy at a more idyllic rate. So the upper scenario that the utilities are shooting for would involve kind of more demand management, which can be either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how much you want to put on consumers in your reports to save electricity. So following those two, both the utility reports and the government reports, and kind of breaking down the important takeaways from those, we're going to get into what needs to change. So what is not going to work moving forward to get to an absolute zero grid by 2035. So Newfoundland and Labrador has a remarkable renewable energy potential that is currently untapped. The province has an average wind power density of 626 watts per meter squared. So this means that if you have a plot of land that's a meter squared in area, the average wind power density in that area is 626 watts, which is the largest out of all four of the Atlantic provinces. An insane amount of on and offshore wind potential in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. But the current installed capacity of renewable energy, such as wind in the province and solar, is significantly low. Newfoundland and Labrador has the lowest level of solar and wind development in Canada. This is partially due to the moratorium on wind power that was in place for the past 15 years in Newfoundland and Labrador. This ban was lifted this year, and the province is focusing on increasing wind power developments in the region. However, the timing behind the lifting of this ban is nothing if not a bit suspicious, because the province is only now interested in increasing wind development in order to power green hydrogen operations for export. So green hydrogen, for those who don't know, is one of the three types of hydrogen fuel. So green hydrogen incorporates using renewable energy to power electrolyzers, which are used to break down water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. And the hydrogen that they get from that electrolysis process can be used as fuel for heavy transport industries, such as shipping, large vehicles such as buses or transfer trucks. So when people are looking at electrifying and greening the heavy transport industry, hydrogen has been kind of the buzz and the talk lately of a way to shift away from gas and oil to power transportation using hydrogen. So last month, a deal was signed between Canada and Germany to form a hydrogen alliance, which would set up a transatlantic supply corridor of hydrogen between Europe and Canada, with the target date of operation being 2025. So this hydrogen is set to be produced in Western Newfoundland and powered by wind energy, which the timing of all this seems very peculiar, because it seems from an outsider looking in that the province is not actually concerned with greening their grid and reducing their reliability on mega hydro by allowing more wind power to be developed in the province, but instead they're looking to improve Canada's position as an energy exporter. And while the economic benefits cannot be overlooked for being an energy exporter and for this type of project, it's more important that all efforts are focused on creating an absolute zero energy grid at home before examining our export opportunities. So the Atlantic provinces should be focused on keeping renewables in-house and not worried about using renewable energy to power your grids foreign or outside of the Atlantic region. So as I mentioned before, Newfoundland and Labrador has more than enough on and offshore wind power potential to power its entire grid. And after they do power their entire grid, then they should look into using these fuels for an export industry, but only then should that even be considered an option. What else needs to change? We need to increase Newfoundland and Labrador's renewable energy storage solutions. So with the increasing amount of renewable energy brought online, there needs to be additional storage options available. Energy sources such as wind and solar, they're classified as intermittent, meaning that energy isn't produced necessarily when it is needed. So you could have solar energy being produced when the demand on the grid isn't as high. So what do you do with the excess energy? It's important to be able to find somewhere to store it. And these storage solutions are crucial when it comes to talking about an absolute grid. So there are different storage options that are available. These options include pumped hydro storage, which uses the gravity between a reservoir and a lower reservoir of water and using gravity to power a turbine. If you have excess energy, you can actually use that excess energy from a windmill or a solar farm to push water back up into a holding reservoir at the top. And then when your energy supply is low, you can use gravity to run that water from the upper reservoir to a lower reservoir, and that movement of water will power a turbine, which can be used to draw electricity to the grid. So storage is a solution that we've recommended for term and short-term energy storage goals in alignment with the David Suzuki report that this presentation is kind of modeled on. And then battery solutions can be looked at into 2050, meet increasing demand that has been modeled for Canada. So the demand for electricity will go up into 2050 due to a rise in electrification of multiple industries, as well as an influx in population. So moving into 2050, when the demand on the grid gets greater, there are other battery solutions that can be investigated. The trick with these battery solutions is that they require precious metals such as the lithium ion, which can have very detrimental mining practices in the communities they take place in. So moving into the future in 2050, if we're looking towards those battery solutions, it's going to be important to make sure that they're coming from a sustainable mining practices and they're not causing more harm than they would be causing good. No new mega hydro. The province and Nalcor should not be focusing on new mega hydro developments such as Gull Island. So Gull Island is another mega hydro project that is being proposed as part of the Lower Churchill development. And in alignment with the David Suzuki Foundation report that I've been discussing, we at the Sierra Club are in agreement that mega hydro is not an absolute zero source of energy, and any new mega hydro project should not be developed in Canada. Instead, the province and both utilities should be investing heavily in on and offshore wind developments for in-province use. So mega hydro does not align with an absolute zero grid. So any further discussions about Gull Island should be immediately terminated and not considered a viable renewable energy solution to Newfoundland, Labrador, or Canada in general. Energy democracy is something that we've been wanting to see brought more online in the Atlantic region. So energy democracy refers to encouraging more municipalities, townships, and First Nation communities to control their own electricity supply. So not relying on big utilities such as Nalcor and Fortis to provide us with our only source of electricity. Diversifying who controls the electricity supply and who is distributing it can put the power back into people's hands, back into communities' hands, and get us moving faster and quicker into a more greener absolute zero grid. Currently, there are no municipally owned utilities in Newfoundland and Labrador. There are a couple throughout other Atlantic provinces, but the energy democracy movement is something we would like to see taken up much quicker in Newfoundland and Labrador as we move to an absolute zero grid. And we can get there. That's in the wrong, I should be pointing to Newfoundland here, but this graph here is taken from the Dave Suzuki report, which I've referred to multiple times throughout this presentation. It shows the installed capacity at 2035 for Canada. So the light green, seafoam green color here is wind, the yellow is solar, this navy is hydro, gray is pumped hydro storage, BHS, this black and white dash is battery, purple is nuclear, and green is biomass. So I just want to point out that this graph here depicts what the installed capacity would look like, including what's currently on the grid. So in Newfoundland here, you can see it's on the very edge of the right here, and it's blowing up a bit over here. So the navy green is hydro. Again, this would be what's currently installed in the province without any new additions. The gray would be pumped hydro storage. So that would need to be brought online between 2035, and right in between the gray and the navy, there's a little tiny sliver of wind. So this is kind of a modeled reality of what the installed capacity of Newfoundland and Labrador could look like in 2035 to have an absolute zero grid. So existing hydro, staying in province, a little bit of additional wind, and then bringing on more pumped hydro storage to accommodate that wind energy. And when they're moving into 2050, there's additional more wind would come online to deal with the increased demand, and more solar as well. But right now through this presentation, we're just focusing on 2035. So what we can do in the next, you know, how many years is it? 11, 12 years to get to 2035. So it can be done. It's a very realistic future which is within reach of Newfoundland and Labrador and Canada in general. And we just need governments and utilities to get on side. So that concludes the formal part of the presentation. Thank you very much for attending. We again visit our website beyondclimatepromises.ca, where you can sign up for our newsletter, which we give lots of good information through, and we have lots of different resources on our website as well that you should check out. We're going to move in now into a kind of informal discussion question period. Again, this focuses on Newfoundland and Labrador. We had a presentation last week on Nova Scotia, and then on Thursday we'll be talking about New Brunswick and PEI. So yeah, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and then I haven't been able to look at the chat since the presentation's been going, so I'm not sure what the order of questions is. Tanette, I'm assuming will have that for me, maybe.
You know, one question that Dean posed was, is the Newfoundland government planning to actually reduce electricity consumption relative to today's levels?
So again, the reports that were released by the province and the utilities are not extensive by any means. The modeling they use is kind of shoddy, but they are predicting an increase in demand, and that kind of joint report between Hydro and Newfoundland Power incorporates a bunch of demand management initiatives that they're planning on bringing online. So this would include initiatives to get consumers to not withdraw so much from the grid, as well as conserving the energy they do have. So implementing initiatives that would decrease like fugitive energy loss through transmission lines and that sort of thing. So in terms of like reducing demand, they're predicting it's going to go up. They're not predicting it'll go down by any means. But they do have solutions in place to reduce that demand on the grid, if that answers your question by any means. Just for like comparison, like when we did this presentation for Nova Scotia last week, Nova Scotia Power is in fact predicting a decrease in overall demand from their grid based on demand side initiatives that they are planning on introducing within the next 10 years. But that kind of more specific data is not available from the utilities at this time for Newfoundland and Labrador specifically.
I know I've been getting questions about this big green hydrogen deal that was, discussed or announced recently. And so for anyone who doesn't know, a company called World Energy GH2, it's a consortium of companies that are hoping to build 164 wind turbines on the small little peninsula of Port-au-Port in Western Newfoundland. And that's only phase one. There are 2 other phases, so it would be double or triple. And this wind energy, as Maggie was pointing out, is not intended for use in Newfoundland and Labrador, but they want to use it to produce so-called green hydrogen, which requires a new plant that would be built in Stephenville, and that hydrogen has to be converted to ammonia in order to be transported to Europe. So this is going to be undertaken by private companies. And, Lindsay, you're asking about the efficiency of using wind power for green hydrogen export rather than use in Newfoundland and Labrador. That is the big question. Yes, it is more expensive and less efficient. And also the experts on renewable energy are saying that green hydrogen should only be a consideration for very particular uses, such as flying a jumbo jet or for long distance shipping. But for everything else, it's more economical and better for the environment to work with battery storage solutions for, for example, for your car or whatever. And of course, pumped hydro storage if it can be a stationary storage. So although it sounds positive in theory that Newfoundland is opening the door to wind, you can pretty much make a mess of anything if you try hard enough. And I think because of the profit motive here, it's not being handled very sensitively or sensibly. There's a comment here from Ivan. Has anyone outside of Newfoundland and Labrador ever been made aware while Muskrat Falls was being built and began to show signs of mismanagement and cost overruns, the government scared people away from electric heat and use of wood stoves by constantly telling consumers that their bills would quadruple? I did not know that. And into the use of wood stoves. Thanks, Ivan. Ernie has a question or a comment. Do you want to unmute yourself and pose your question, Arnie?
Well, I don't think anybody in Newfoundland or in the area that they talk about getting this wind power farm are against wind farm. It against where they want to put it. They have selected the most pristine nature area in all of Newfoundland. In Grossmore National Park, the main part of the park to get in UNESCO Park was the tableland, which consists of peridotite, which is the earth's mantle, would come to the surface. Where they want to put this wind power farm, we have 3 more, which is bigger than tableland and more beautiful and more, and well, I wouldn't say more used, because, but well used. So there is so many other places in Newfoundland that they can put a wind farm. You have all the mountain from Berthieu Highway all the way down to Port aux Basques on one side, and also on the other side of the highway. So leave Lewis Hill, Blomidon Mountain, and Port au Port Peninsula out of this. Thank you.
Thanks. It's good to get an up-close perspective on that. I also personally, I'm skeptical that 164 wind turbines on any small area of land is going to make any sense whatsoever. I think it's kind of following the Costco or Walmart model of everything. So, you know, I can't imagine on my small street a Costco suddenly, you know, showing up and starting to build one of their ginormous box stores. I think there's something to be said for small and medium scale wind and solar projects, which will have less of an negative environmental impact on a community, and will actually be more resilient too, if you think about it, because it's decentralizing and distributing energy across a bigger area where people are able to tap into it. With the centralized utility models that we depend on today, it's kind of like one strike of lightning can take us all out, you know. And one of the reports that came out recently from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was focused on adaptation and resilience. And a key message was that we need to be looking at decentralized electricity systems, and that they should also be diversified, so not relying only on one form of energy, and distributed so that it is not, not as vulnerable.
One other comment also is that it's big money coming in to take advantage of Newfoundland again.
Yeah.
And leave nothing to the local economy. Take it off all out.
Yeah. And you've probably not watched this series, but I'm going to refer to the Hunger Games. You know, it's what happens over and over again is that big industries, extractive industries like this, and the governments that back them say, hey, look at all these jobs, right? And when you're saying that to an area that is struggling with poverty and unemployment, it's pretty hard for people to turn their backs on what could be the difference between, you know, pulling themselves out of poverty or not. And it's, but it's such an unfair position to put workers and families in, that in order to keep the lights on and food on the table, they have to participate in an industry that will destroy the local ecosystems and leave Newfoundland further impoverished down the road.
And also geopark is now a big thing in the world. I think there is 160 geoparks around the world. There is 4 or 5 in Canada. We have been working now 8 to 10 years on creating Lewis Hill, Blomidon Mountain and Northern Hill and the area into a UNESCO geopark. And when that gets established, I think that will create more money for the Bay of Island area than any windmill farm, because the money from the windmill farm will go out of the area. We will create a big tourist industry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope people will tune in next month for a webinar on energy democracy. And it'll be looking at what municipalities in particular can do and are doing in different parts of Canada and the world to really bring the political and economic power back to communities. And electricity utilities are kind of an anchor institution that can support lots of economic development and sort of shift the balance of power, you know, figuratively and literally, towards community ownership and the revenue and benefits of that ownership going directly back into the community. There in rural United States, electricity cooperatives were the ones that actually brought electricity to large swaths of the United States. And even today, electricity cooperatives serve 56% of the landmass in the United States. So this is not some flaky idea that's just come up. This is these are tried and true century-long traditions here. And I think in Atlantic Canada, we also have a good toehold when it comes to cooperatives. And it would be really interesting to look at that again and say, are there some cooperative models here that we want to revive? Any final words?
Jay asks, could we nationalize NS Power?
I feel like we should let the folks from Newfoundland and Labrador answer that one, because they're dealing with a Crown Corporation, Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro.
We also deal with Emera.
Sorry, yes, we do deal with Emera. Oh, do you deal with Emera in Newfoundland? Is
yes, we do.
Yes, yeah, and Fortis.
They own
yeah.
everything from central across to Cape Breton in the power line.
Okay, yeah. The one thing I would say to your question, though, Jay, is that when we look at how crown corporations are operating today as electric utilities in the region and beyond, they're functioning very much like traditional corporations. And, the inquiries that have happened around, Muskrat Falls, or in the case of New Brunswick Power and its massive debt, it's also a crown corporation. We find mismanagement, corruption, and also that they're operating, for not in the general interest of the public. They're operating in the interest of that corporation. But we do think that energy democracy, when it's held by communities, allows for an actual public utility that works for people and benefits people. Ivan, you have a comment or a question?
There's also the other piece with Emera where they.
Ivan, can you turn up your?
Oops, sorry, I can get closer to it as well. There you
yeah,
go.
Good.
There's also the piece with Emera where they help create the maritime link. And then a part of their deal was to go to Boston to the energy regulators and sell this power, and they completely and utterly failed in that presentation. I was told by some people we had up in our we were used to run a hunting camp, and some guys from Boston who were in the energy trading sector let us know that Emera totally botched their presentation. They came in high and mighty and got completely laughed out of the room when they tried to sell Muskrat Falls power to the eastern seaboard of the United States.
Interesting.
So you have every company. So when you said nationalize Nova Scotia Power, I'm like, and completely change who's running it so that it can actually act on a national and international level.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Annie in New York. Sorry.
Yes.
Hi. Yes. Hi. Thank you for the comment, Ivan. I was wondering, when did that happen with the botched presentation by Elmire?
So we sold the camp in 2018. I'd say it was 2016 or 17 when the project was when the lines were laid and we were ready to send power. We have more power than we know what to do with in Newfoundland. The whole province, I think, uses 3 megawatts, and we have way more currently without Muskrat Falls. And so that's why the project is considered boondoggle and a waste. It was jobs. It was sold on jobs. Like everything in Newfoundland is like, here's a job. Yes, take my firstborn child, please, because there's a job.
Yeah. The Hunger Games.
Yeah.
So could I add, like in a general North American, I work out of New York. I'm originally from Grand-Mère, Quebec, but I'm here fighting dams from New York. That's what I'm doing. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
And where this all fits is either it is the debts that these utilities, Labrador, Newfoundland, Hydro-Quebec, these debts maybe need to be looked into as an argument towards an alternative model, like a more community-based direction, because I know in Hydro-Quebec it's over $40 billion. I don't know I know that over with Muskrat Falls and the amount of debt there, it sort of almost requires a look at these type of debts that are being carried by these crown corporations that have failed as a reason to create an alternative to that. And then from there could be hopefully better directives and priorities. That's what I'm thinking. So down here in the Northeast, we have over $100 million that was spent in New York City and in Massachusetts to sell this power that's combination into Hydro-Quebec with Labrador and feeding into the grid. And that's a lot of money to be spending down here in New York and in Massachusetts. And that needs to be disclosed also in the context of how this folly of this selling to the United States. Anyway, thanks for listening to this thought.
I think one of the challenges, Annie, is that we assume that if we put forward a reasonable argument, we're going to get a reasonable response. And I think what the last 3 or 4 decades have shown us is that that's not working. And that's really distressing. I think more members of the general public are hearing the message, but the industries and the governments that are backing them seem to be digging in their heels more rather than less.
There's not a lot of radical thinking in local governments or people who are in decision-making positions. And you can tell people as much, you can throw, you know, figures upwards of $1 billion of debt or that they've been paying as ratepayers and consumers to these utilities and say, look, like Muskrat Falls, we've been on the hook in Nova Scotia for around $205 million to the delays of Muskrat Falls. But you can say that, I mean, we've been saying that for over a year, and people it still doesn't really click that there's an alternate way that you can get your electricity supplied to your house that's not requiring you to, you know, be at the mercy of these large utilities. So that's kind of where we've been shifting a lot of our focus here at the Sierra Club, has been looking at energy democracy, and instead of, you know, getting the utilities to change, let's just change the whole structure.